Yep. So we are live back here on the SaaS Coach Show. Back again. New year, new series.
We are 2020.
Yeah.
It's a good big year to start some new shows and have a lot of fun.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
So I'm Tony Zayas. This is Andy Halko.
And we're from Insivia, a strategic growth consultancy here in Cleveland. And, this is one of our 2 live shows that we do. This one's every Wednesday around 11 o'clock.
Yep.
For people that like to tune in live. And, we just finished I think 12-part series on SaaS website conversion. So we went through 12 episodes and talked about all different unique ways that companies can improve the conversion on their website. And there were some great tactics in there that were really, easily applicable to any site.
Yeah.
And so we finished up with that session, and now we're transitioning, right?
Yep. So new topic for the new year.
It is.
We're focusing on retention.
Okay.
So that's a big one, right? After you convert your customers, you get them on board. How do you keep them? That's a huge challenge and super important. So we're going to be going through kind of the same type of format. We've broken out the principles. I think there's 12 in this series as well.
Yeah, and there's, we're doing all of this on SaaS, software as a service, and really focusing software companies, and right after a conversion, because I always think that's really important. You got to get people to take action before you're going to drive into building visits through marketing and that stuff. But then the next topic that I think is just really important for software companies is, like you said, how do we retain the users that we have? And it can be a peril for companies, to not retain users and see a high churn rate. So we really wanted to dive in deep and, look at what are some very quick tips and things that can help people improve. And so we've got that as we have 12 very specific, strategies, tactics that you can implement that will improve user retention and reduce those churn rates to help you obviously scale the company.
Yeah.
So
I think this is it makes sense. We're doing this following conversion, but it is a challenge, for the industry out there. But it is that one that I think when you're launching a business, depending on where you're at, getting those customers is the exciting part, right?
Right.
But then keeping them is that one that is essential for sustainability. So real important stuff. I'm excited about.
Well, and I think for, people that are new into developing their own software, one of the challenges that they have is the bright-eyed, bushy-tail issue is, you come in and you start getting users in, and you, in being so engaged in this, see such high value to your software, and every feature feels like, wow, people are going to really love that and use it. And we'll talk about later in the series, how you measure individual feature usage and how that impacts the value to customers, because not every feature is used 100% of the time. And there's even statistics out there about different things. But we have this idea in our heads that people are going to convert, they're going to get in the software, and they're going to fall in love and never leave. And the reality is that that's not the case. We have a lot of people drop off in the first week. They're going to cancel in the first month. And so you really have to think about what are the tactics to keep people not only beyond that initial dating period, but then turn it into a marriage where they're staying long term. And I think, again, that most new founders, software developers, are a little ambitious in their thinking of how many people will, stick with it once they sign up.
Yeah. So I think what's exciting about this series is there are I think you're going to get some takeaways of things that you can implement and really just add a lot of value. Because to that point, when there's certain features that you might think everyone's going to love, I may not even know that it's there.
Right.
And that's some of the challenges. How do you properly communicate and articulate everything that's available there? If you do it all on the front side when the person is signing up, maybe they don't remember. So it's a lot to
Yeah.
it all, but we're going to get to it.
Think of the softwares that you probably use. There's features in there that you just don't touch. I think a couple of the ones that we use here at our business, there's software that some of the people in the team, they use certain features every day, ones that I don't ever touch, and then as a team, I'm sure ones that we just completely ignore. And so that's definitely a challenge. Both if you have too many features and ones that are distracting from the main ones that are actually keeping people there, but also the cost of developing, maintaining, supporting things that aren't valuable. But we'll really be diving in. That's I think maybe principle number 3, where we're really talking about feature usage and how you balance the roadmap to really increase retention over time. So we're going to be, we're right now finishing up a guidebook, and what we like to do is with these shows have a physical guidebook, physical download guidebook that people can grab, and then that way what we're talking about is in more detail in here. And we're just finishing that up now, and it'll be live pretty soon. But we've got, the definitive guidebook, the SaaS retention, 12 big honking principles to improving SaaS retention. And so we're really hoping that people will get a ton of value out of this. And there's going to be some really concrete stuff that people can get when they download it.
Yeah, for sure. Saw some really good ones in there already. So I'm excited to dive in and kind of learn more, talk more about it, and share with everyone.
Yeah. And we thought during this first episode, it's just an introduction. Next week we're really going to dive into that first principle. But, let's say you understand the idea of SaaS retention, but maybe you don't know a ton about it. What they typically talk about is churn rate. So churn rate is the amount of customers that you're losing. And when you look at churn rate, it can be measured in different ways, monthly versus annually, and it actually matters because it can change your thinking. Like if you're looking at, annually, this is how many people we lose versus monthly, and then also balance to how your subscription model might work. So you really have to look at those numbers, and it does matter, especially if you're thinking of what's industry standard and how do we meet that type of thing. But the biggest thing is, at the end of the day, is that, just a couple percentage points in increase in churn. So you're losing just 2, 3, 5% more people either per month or annually. It can be a big impact on scale. And the thought process is if you've built a marketing team, a sales team, and you're actually generating those leads and getting those conversions, and then you're closing those sales, well, if you're getting 10 a month, but you're churning through 2 a month, I mean, at the end of the day, you're not getting the growth rate that you really need. And so our goal is, how do we really increase that retention to reduce the churn rate? And again, that's one of those things, I think, when you're new into software, you're bright-eyed and bushy-tailed, and you think that you're going to have this really high retention rate. And what I've seen with different software businesses is early on, the retention rate actually can be pretty bad. We're talking about getting to some industry standards of 3, 7, 15%, but you can see with some new softwares, 50%. If they're on a monthly cycle, that you can see people sign up and then quickly stop paying for the software. And if you're at that 50% churn rate, or potentially even more, I mean, that's literally a death toll before you're really off and running.
Yeah, for sure. And if you think about when we went through conversion, that's the idea of you getting visitors to your site and getting them to take that action to sign up. With retention, it's really how do you prove the value. If it's a monthly recurring charge, every month you have to be taking action to be proving that value. So in ways, I think conversion can be a little bit easier. This can be, to me, a little bit trickier because you got to figure it all out.
Well, and especially in a world, we look at it with our own businesses. we've got a ton of different softwares that we're using,
Yep.
and you have to evaluate on a regular basis, like, which ones am I going to keep? And we've definitely moved to a model where there's tons of subscription services, and that's how most software packages that we use are delivered,
Yeah.
and that's where the industry is continuing to move. But there's a point where a company can only budget so many, and the question is what you're providing, what's going to make the list for the business to keep. And so that can be a really big thought process, and we'll kind of talk through that again in the principles. How do you make the software sticky, which means that people really want to stay. We talk about the features, we'll talk about all types of things associated, again, to how do you increase retention and reduce churn. But it's really about discussing, at least today, this is what the topic is and what we're really focused on. Now, there's a number of things that can impact a churn rate, and I think this is just kind of an important baseline at the end of the day. So you look at your equation, are you annual, monthly? And that's something that we just talked about, is you really have to look at how your model impacts what your rate is. And then software type and price. So, when we look at commodity software that's lower priced, something that's an easy tool, I think for us, there's a difference between our accounting software and the one that we use maybe to create site maps for a website project. And so one is obviously, is it commodity, something that I can get anywhere? Is it mission critical? All of those different pieces versus, the mission critical stuff like an accounting software. It's pretty hard for me to live without that as a business. And that's in the B2B space. Same thing with consumer side, is a game could be very commodity, or there's a lot of them or different options, but again, maybe something in the banking space or healthcare, that's something that I really need to have or use. So there's a big difference in kind of like what's the type of software, and then obviously the cost. If something costs me $100,000 a year versus $10 a month, that's going to impact my just overall churn rate and these ideas. And you really have to think about that when you're determining some of these pieces.
For sure.
And then really the last one is company size and growth rate. For various reasons, a $20 million company will have a completely different churn rate than a $2 million company. And really it's about that life cycle piece. Are you early in the business, and what's the expectation for a churn rate, versus are you 6 years in, and you've got a completely different approach. And so what all this really does is lead up to the fact that if you look out there, there's going to be all types of information about what different churn rates are out there and what you should have. Should you have a 3% churn rate or a 15%? The reality is that there is no standard in the industry. And that's why I go back to those factors that we just talked about, is because it really does have to do with what's your business model. Are you B2C, B2B? What's your pricing level? Is your software considered mission critical versus not? Where are you in your business life cycle? Are you 6 months in or 4 years in? And so going out there and reading these articles that will tell you, oh, you should only have a 7% churn rate for a year. Honestly, that's just people making up information at this point.
It's like saying you should be 180 pounds.
Yeah, right.
It's like, well, how tall are you? And
Yeah,
there's
exactly.
a lot of variables that go into that.
That's a perfect analogy. And so I really think that when we talk about this, I always like to have benchmarks. And when we talk about some of our other topics, we had benchmarks and say this is where you should be. I think churn rate's one of those tough ones. What I think you need to do is make sure that you're measuring it, because if you don't have a good idea and that's not one of your key performance indicators for your company in software, that's obviously a huge problem if you're not paying attention to it. But then it's really like anything else, is if we're at a 35% churn rate right now, setting a goal for ourselves that in the next 6 months, how do we get that to 30%? And then using tactics like we're going to talk about to really try and drive that impact. So I think it's about looking at where you're at. If you want to do benchmarks, trying to make sure you're comparing to like type companies, and then really setting your own goals of how do you reduce churn rate. And we'll even talk about some of that in the principles of looking at, setting goals and how you look at the data correctly and you're tracking that information. So there's a lot of things we're really going to dive into.
Yeah, so if you guys are just tuning in and you were not familiar with our conversion series, this is going to kind of work the same way.
Yeah.
We're going to give you guys some principles that you can work with, step at a time. So the first, I think, starting point is to understand kind of what this means to your business and be measuring it, tracking it, be paying attention. And then over the next, couple of months, we're going to be going through all these principles and giving you guys some, bite-sized pieces you can take, you can implement, try to improve and continually, incrementally get better at, retaining your users.
I think if you have a software business, this is a must watch because, retention, as we just kind of described, is so important to viability and growth and value of the company. It's something that we constantly need to be working on and improving, and by kind of going through what we're going to have a lot of very kind of like, this is an easy execution piece in the business to make some impact into our churn rate and retention. So I think it's going to be a really interesting and valuable series for people to get good turnkey information out of.
Yeah, and I think you're going to get some different perspectives of things that you just haven't thought of, right? Everybody kind of looks at their business and their software a little bit differently. You come with different expertise and things you're excited about. And hopefully here we'll have some things that will just open your eyes to, and you'll think, wow, I didn't even consider doing that. Easy little fix that's going to improve things for you. So
totally agree. Let's see. Might be worth, so we're going to have these 12 big honking principles. And just as like a lead-in, we're not going to talk about it, but let's talk about what we're doing next week. Is we're going to do principle 1 is making the onboarding experience frickin' awesome. And I do think that that's so important, and we'll dive into it, but we've seen this time and time again, is that first day, first week, first month of someone getting into a software, even after a trial or a demo or whatever it might be, is so important to whether they stick with it in the long term. And you can literally see onboarding and that initial process impacting users and retention a year later, 2 years later. And so that's something that, is one of the first things we want to talk about, is how do you make that initial impression just awesome, that people are so excited that they made the decision, they're confident they made the right one, and then they're excited to dive in and really continue to grow the value of what they just purchased.
Yeah, that first impression. It doesn't change for SaaS businesses.
No.
It's super important, right?
So that'll be what we're diving into next week. This should be a great series on SaaS retention. We're excited to do it, and it'll be good.
Awesome. Well,
so check out the page. We're going to have this on our page. Soon we'll have the guidebook available for download. We're going to have all the episodes there, continue to build out some other content. So if you're interested in SaaS retention, there will be a hub of information that we'll have on SaaS.coach.
Yeah, and if you like this stuff, I would encourage you to take a look at SaaS.coach and go take a look at the conversion series. If you haven't seen that yet, that might be something that you find really valuable as well. But with that, Andy, I guess we will see you guys next week. So tune back in and we'll dive in with more detail on this first principle. We're excited to get going with this series.
Let's do it. All right, guys. Thanks, everybody. Have a good day.
Take care.